The silence of space was endless. For days, Daniel had drifted, his small exploration craft damaged by an unexpected storm of meteors. He had survived on ration packs and hope. But now the last lights on his control panel were flickering. His heart beat faster as the ship began to fall toward the surface of an unknown planet. The air around him trembled with the sound of burning metal. The planet below looked strange and beautiful. From the small window, Daniel saw forests of shining crystal and wide rivers glowing like liquid silver. Clouds curled like ribbons across a bright sky. He had never seen anything like it, even after years of exploring the outer reaches of known space. His ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere, and Daniel gripped the controls with both hands, trying to keep the descent steady. The crash was rough. The craft skidded across uneven ground, tearing through tall grass that looked like waves of emerald fire. The noise was deafening, and for a moment Daniel thought it was the end. But somehow, when the dust settled, he was still alive. His body ached and smoke filled the cabin, but he managed to push open the emergency hatch and stumble out into the strange world. The air was warm, thick with the scent of flowers he could not name. Above him, enormous crystal towers rose like trees, their surfaces catching the sunlight and scattering it across the ground in soft colors. Insects with wings like glass buzzed in the air, and the sound of running water came from somewhere close. Daniel took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing heart. He needed to check supplies, repair what he could, and send a signal. But before he could take a step back toward the wreck, he felt eyes on him. He turned. From the tall grass and shadows of crystal, figures were emerging. At first, Daniel thought they were illusions made by his weary mind. But no, these were living beings, tall and graceful, moving with a strange elegance. Their skin shimmered faintly in the light, smooth as polished stone, and their eyes were large and filled with sharp intelligence. There were many of them, perhaps a dozen, all watching him silently. Daniel's first thought was relief. He had landed on a world with intelligent life. His second thought was fear. None of them looked pleased to see him. One of them stepped forward. She was taller than Daniel by half a head, with long dark hair tied with strands of crystal beads. Her gaze was steady and commanding, and the others seemed to wait for her signal. She spoke in a language Daniel did not understand. The words were smooth and strong, rising and falling like music, but there was no kindness in her tone. Daniel raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not your enemy," he said softly, though he knew they could not understand him. The leader tilted her head. With a quick motion, she gave a command. At once, several of the tribe moved closer. They carried long spears tipped with crystal, which glowed faintly as if charged with some energy. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had no weapon, no defense. They surrounded him, studying him with expressions he could not read. Some looked curious, some wary, and others seemed almost hostile. Daniel noticed something strange. All of them were women. Not a single male figure stood among them. The leader spoke again, pointing at him, then at the wrecked ship. Her voice grew sharper, and a murmur passed through the group. Daniel could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing on him. Two of them moved forward and gestured for him to walk. When he hesitated, the tip of a spear nudged his side, not cruelly but firmly enough to make him obey. He glanced once more at his ship, then followed them, unsure if he was walking toward safety or death. The journey was long and silent. They led him through tall crystal forests, where light shifted like liquid across the ground. Strange birds with feathered tails as bright as jewels flew overhead. Daniel's mind raced with questions, but the tribe gave him no answers. At last, they reached a settlement. It was unlike anything Daniel had seen. The village was built around massive crystal pillars that formed natural towers, and the tribe had carved homes into their bases. Rope bridges stretched between high platforms, and colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. Dozens more of the alien women appeared, gathering quickly when they saw the strangers return. Their voices rose in surprise as they spotted Daniel. Some pointed, some gasped, and a few stared at him with open hostility. The leader raised her hand, and the noise fell to silence. She spoke firmly, and the crowd parted as she led Daniel to the largest of the crystal halls. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the faint hum of the crystals. Several older women sat in a circle, their eyes wise but weary. They looked at Daniel as though he were a ghost. One of them whispered something, and the others nodded slowly. The leader stood tall and spoke to them, her voice carrying authority. She pointed at Daniel again, then struck her spear against the crystal floor. The sound echoed like a bell. The elders began to murmur in low voices, their eyes fixed on him. Though he could not understand their words, Daniel felt the weight of their debate. He caught fragments of emotion in their tones, fear, anger, and something else, a strange mix of wonder and disbelief. Finally, one of the elders rose. She stepped close to Daniel, peering into his eyes as though searching for an answer hidden inside him. Then she spoke a single word. The crowd outside echoed it, louder until the sound filled the hall. Daniel did not know what the word meant, but he could guess. It was a name, a label, perhaps even a warning. They had identified him as something they remembered, something from long ago. That night, Daniel was placed in a small chamber carved into the crystal. The door was guarded by two spear-wielding women, their eyes sharp and unblinking. He sat on the cool floor, thinking about everything that had happened. Why were there no men among them? Why did they look at him with such a mix of fear and hunger? And what had the elder seen in his face that made the whole tribe react? Sleep came slowly. Outside, the sounds of the alien night rose, the calls of unknown creatures, the rustling of wind through crystal forests, the distant hum of rivers glowing under the stars. Daniel knew he was alive, but he was not safe. These people had spared him for now. Yet deep in his heart he felt the truth. They had not decided whether he was a miracle sent by fate or prey that had wandered foolishly into their land. And in that tension, his first day on the alien world came to an end. The sun rose over the alien village, scattering light across the crystal towers and bridges. Daniel awoke to the soft hum of the crystals that surrounded his small chamber. He rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly, trying to remember where he was. The night had been long, filled with uneasy dreams of voices he could not understand and faces staring at him in silence. When he stepped toward the door, he found the guards still there. They did not speak to him, but their eyes followed every move he made. Daniel raised a hand in a small gesture of peace, but neither responded. Soon the leader from the day before appeared. Her presence commanded respect, and the guard stepped aside as she entered. She studied Daniel carefully, then motioned for him to follow. Daniel obeyed, his heart racing. As he walked through the village, he felt dozens of eyes on him. Women of all ages stood near the crystal homes, some holding baskets of food, others carrying tools made of stone and crystal. They whispered among themselves, and Daniel could feel the mix of emotions in their stares. Curiosity, fear, and suspicion. The leader led him to an open square at the center of the village. A large crowd had gathered there, forming a wide circle. At the far end, the elders were seated again, their faces stern and watchful. Daniel realized this was no ordinary gathering. Something important was about to happen. The leader raised her spear and spoke to the crowd in her musical but sharp language. The words rose and fell with authority. Daniel could not understand, but the reaction was clear. The tribe had decided to test him. Two young warriors stepped forward, each carrying a long spear tipped with glowing crystal. They moved to the center of the circle, striking the ground with their weapons. A cheer rose from the crowd. Daniel's stomach sank. The leader pointed at him. Then she pointed at the warriors. The meaning was clear. He was to prove himself. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "I didn't come here to fight." But no one understood his words. To them, his refusal would mean weakness. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward. The crowd's voices grew louder as he entered the circle. The warriors stood ready, their eyes sharp and confident. They were trained for combat, and he was only a stranded explorer. He knew he would not survive if he tried to match their strength. But strength was not his only weapon. The leader gave a sharp cry, and the trial began. One warrior lunged forward with her spear. Daniel leapt aside, feeling the rush of air as the crystal tip passed close to his chest. The crowd cheered. The second warrior moved in, swinging her weapon low to trip him. Daniel stumbled but managed to keep his balance. He could not fight them head-on. He needed another way. His eyes scanned the ground and the environment around him. The circle was surrounded by crystal pillars that rose from the earth. Their surfaces were slick but firm, and some had loose shards at their bases. As the warriors closed in again, Daniel grabbed a shard from the ground. It was sharp and light, small enough to fit in his hand. When the next strike came, he used it not to attack but to deflect, pushing the spear aside just enough to create an opening. He darted backward, forcing them to chase him rather than letting them control the fight. The crowd roared in surprise. This was not the behavior they expected. Daniel was not attacking like a warrior. He was surviving like a thinker. The warriors grew frustrated. One swung high, aiming to pin him. Daniel ducked low and rolled, using his smaller size to slip between them. Dust rose in the air and the crowd gasped as he managed to escape their trap. Sweat dripped down his face, his breath sharp in his chest. He knew he could not keep this up forever. He had to find a way to end the trial without killing, without causing more fear. When the first warrior attacked again, Daniel caught the shaft of her spear with both hands and twisted sharply. The weapon slipped from her grip, clattering against the crystal ground. Instead of striking her with it, Daniel threw it aside. Then he stepped back, raising his hands open to the sky to show he would not kill. The crowd fell silent. The second warrior still held her weapon, but she hesitated. Daniel looked directly into her eyes, shaking his head. He would not be their enemy. For a long moment, the square was filled with nothing but silence and the faint hum of the crystals. Then the leader raised her spear high and shouted a single word. The crowd echoed it, voices rising like a wave. The trial was over. The two warriors stepped back, their faces tense but not angry. They accepted his victory, or rather his choice not to destroy. Daniel had proven himself not by strength but by restraint. The leader approached him, her expression unreadable. She studied him closely, then touched her hand lightly to his chest. It was not a gesture of affection but one of recognition. She turned to the crowd and spoke again. The people cheered, though Daniel could not tell if it was for him or for the leader's decision to spare him. That night, Daniel was given food for the first time since his arrival. It was a strange fruit with a soft, glowing center. The taste was sweet, unlike anything he had ever eaten. Though the guards still watched him, the atmosphere had shifted. The stares of the people were no longer only hostile. Some were curious now, even cautious but hopeful. Later, as he sat outside the chamber under the alien stars, he thought about what had happened. The trial had not been about survival alone. It had been a test of who he was. Would he act with violence, or would he show another path? He had chosen the second, and it had changed everything. Still, questions haunted him. Why were there no men in the tribe? Why had they looked at him with such intensity, as if he were both danger and salvation? As the night deepened, Daniel heard footsteps. The leader approached, walking quietly until she stood before him. She sat down without a word, her eyes fixed on the horizon. After a long silence, she spoke softly in her language. Though he could not understand, her tone was calmer than before. She pointed at the stars, then at him. Her voice carried both wonder and warning. Daniel felt that she was telling him something important, that his arrival was more than an accident. When she rose to leave, she gave him a final look. It was not the look of an enemy, but of someone waiting to see what choice he would make next. Daniel sat alone until the stars faded into dawn. He knew the trial was only the beginning. The real test had not yet arrived, and deep inside he felt certain that his presence on this world would change everything, for him and for them. The days passed slowly for Daniel in the alien village. Though he remained under guard, the tribe no longer treated him as a prisoner waiting for judgment. Instead, he was studied, tested, and sometimes even respected. The trial in the square had proven something to them, though Daniel still did not fully understand what. The leader visited him often. Her name, as he slowly learned through gestures and repeated sounds, was Sira. She was not only the leader of the warriors, but also the voice of the tribe in matters of survival. Daniel began to pick up pieces of their language, learning simple words through careful pointing and mimicry. It was not enough for full conversation, but it was enough for the basics: water, food, yes, no danger, safe. Still, many questions haunted him. Why was the tribe made only of women? What disaster had taken their men? And why did some of the elders look at him with fear, as if his very presence could reopen an old wound? One evening, after a long day of being led through the village and shown tasks of farming and hunting, Daniel found himself staring at the great crystal towers that glowed faintly in the dusk. The crystals seemed alive, humming with energy. He noticed carvings etched into their surfaces, symbols, shapes, and stories. When he pointed at one of the carvings, a young villager named Lyra, who had been assigned to watch him, hesitated. She glanced around as if worried someone might see. then took his hand and guided him closer. Her eyes were bright with curiosity, and though she was cautious, she seemed less afraid of him than most. She touched the carving with her fingers, then traced a line that showed figures of men standing beside women. Daniel's heart jumped. The carving was old, but it clearly showed that once men had been part of their people. He pointed at the men in the carving, then at himself. Lyra nodded slowly, sadness in her eyes. She whispered a word, Zaruk. Daniel repeated it softly. She nodded again. He guessed it was their word for man, but then her face darkened. She pointed at another carving, one that showed fire falling from the sky, great sickness spreading, and the figures of men lying still while women wept. Daniel felt a chill. The Great Blight. He did not need translation to understand. Some kind of disaster had wiped out the men of this world. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He sat in his chamber listening to the faint hum of the crystals, his mind turning. If all the men had died long ago, how had this tribe survived for 75 years? And why did they look at him as if he were both a curse and a hope? The next day, Sira herself came to fetch him. She took him beyond the village, deeper into the crystal forest. The guards followed at a distance, but Sira led him directly, as if she had a purpose in mind. They walked for hours, the light shifting as the tall crystals bent the sun into strange patterns. At last, they reached a massive structure half buried in the earth. It was not natural crystal, but something older, stone and metal cracked with age. Moss and vines covered its surface, but Daniel recognized the shape at once. It was a ruin. Sira placed her hand on the entrance, then pushed aside the vines. Together they stepped inside. The air was cool and dry, filled with the smell of dust and age. Strange machines lined the walls, silent and broken. Symbols were carved into panels, and Daniel realized this place had once been filled with knowledge. Perhaps it was a library or a hall of records. Sira lit a small crystal torch, its glow steady and soft. She led him down a corridor until they reached a great chamber. In the center stood a circular pedestal with a cracked surface. Around it were walls filled with carvings, scenes of battles, of sickness, and of something more terrifying. Daniel stepped closer. His eyes widened as he studied the carvings. They told the story in pictures. The first carvings showed the tribe living in peace, men and women together, building homes, raising families, hunting and farming beneath the glowing crystals. Then came the arrival of ships from the sky, alien ships different from his own. The next carvings were darker. They showed strange figures, tall and armored, releasing clouds of black mist. The mist spread across the land. Men fell first, their bodies weak against the plague. Women survived, though scarred by grief. The enemy ships left, leaving behind devastation. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This was not a natural disaster. The Great Blight had been a weapon, created and released by another race. Sira watched him closely as he traced the carvings with his fingers. She did not need to speak. The story was clear enough. But then he saw the last carving. It showed a figure standing apart from the others, not one of their tribe, but different. This figure had come from the sky, holding a flame that pushed back the darkness. The tribe bowed before this figure, as if they saw in him the promise of survival. Daniel's hand froze on the wall. His heart pounded. Was this a prophecy? Or had another stranger arrived long ago? Sira touched his shoulder gently. She looked into his eyes, her expression both hopeful and heavy. Then she spoke slowly and carefully, as if she wanted him to understand every word. 75 years. Zaruk, gone. Daniel repeated the words softly. He understood enough. It had been 75 years since the men of this world had been destroyed. And now for the first time a man had returned. Him. They left the ruin in silence. As they walked back to the village, Daniel felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. His arrival had not been a simple accident. If the rival empire had used weapons once, they might still exist. And if they discovered that a human man had survived here, they might return to finish what they started. That evening, the elders summoned him to the central hall once more. Sira stood beside him, her hand firm on her spear. The elders spoke in low, serious tones, their eyes locked on him. The villagers gathered outside, whispering. One elder, the oldest among them, leaned forward. She spoke slowly, carefully, using words he might understand. You, not curse, you, choice. Daniel swallowed hard. A choice. To them, his presence could mean destruction, or it could mean salvation. That night, as he lay awake beneath the alien stars, Daniel understood the danger more clearly than ever. The truth was out. The blight was not nature but war. The enemy who had taken the men could return, and if they did, this tribe would need him, not as a warrior alone, but as a human who carried the strength of survival in a different way. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "If I crashed here for a reason, then I will find it. I won't let history repeat itself." For the first time since his arrival, he felt a purpose growing inside him. He was not only a survivor now, he was part of a story much larger than himself. The village had grown quieter in the days after Daniel discovered the truth inside the ruins. The people still watched him carefully, but the whispers in the air had changed. Where once there had been only suspicion and fear, now there was something else, an unspoken hope, fragile but real. Daniel tried to help wherever he could. He carried food from the fields, fetched water from the glowing river, and repaired tools using the skills he had learned as an explorer. Though many still kept their distance, some of the younger villagers approached him with cautious smiles. Children, curious and brave, sometimes followed him, laughing softly when he pretended not to notice. But Daniel knew peace would not last. The carvings in the ruins had shown him the truth. The blight that destroyed the men was no act of nature. It was a weapon, created and unleashed by a rival empire, and if those enemies had done it once, they could return. His fears proved right one morning when the sky itself trembled. Daniel was helping Lyra gather strange glowing fruit when he heard a distant roar. It was not thunder, nor the call of any beast he had come to know. It was the sound of engines, deep and metallic, shaking the air. He looked up and froze. High above the crystal forest, dark shapes moved through the clouds. Sleek and sharp, they glided like predators, their metal hulls glinting in the sun. His heart sank. They were ships, not explorers like him, but war vessels. The enemy had returned. The village erupted in panic. Cries rang out as people rushed to gather their children and flee into the crystal towers. Warriors armed themselves with spears tipped with glowing shards. Sira shouted commands, her voice steady and strong even as fear swept through her people. Daniel ran to her side. He pointed at the ships, his voice urgent. "They're coming for me. They know I'm here." Sira's eyes narrowed. She seemed to understand enough. She shook her head firmly. "Not only you all." She was right. The rival empire would not stop with him. They wanted to ensure their old weapon remained unbroken, that the tribe would never rise again. The first ship descended. Its engines roared as it landed in a clearing just beyond the village. Dust rose in thick clouds as a ramp lowered. From the shadows inside stepped tall figures clad in armor. Their forms were lean and sharp, their faces hidden behind dark masks. Each carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The crowd gasped. The children were rushed away. The warriors tightened their circle around the elders. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The enemy leader raised a hand and the others stopped. Then, in a voice amplified by some device, he spoke in a language Daniel partly understood. "Give us the stranger. He is not of your kind. He does not belong. Hand him over and we will spare you." The words echoed across the square. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had expected this. The enemy wanted him, not because they feared him as one man, but because of what he represented. If he could survive their plague, perhaps others could too. His existence was proof that their weapon was not perfect. The villagers murmured in fear. Some looked at him, torn between protecting their people and saving themselves. The enemy offered them a way out, and temptation flickered in their eyes. Daniel stepped forward before anyone could speak. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. "No, don't give me up. If you do, they'll come back again. They'll never stop. They'll destroy you anyway." The villagers could not understand all his words, but his tone carried truth. Sira stepped forward and stood at his side. Her spear glowed faintly in the dim light. She raised her chin and spoke firmly to the enemy. "No." The enemy leader tilted his head. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then he gave a sharp signal and the soldiers advanced. The battle began. Crystal spears clashed against energy blades. Warriors of the tribe moved with speed and grace, using the forest and the high platforms to strike from above. The enemy fought with precision, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly force. Daniel had no weapon but his mind. He shouted to the warriors, pointing at weak points in the enemy's armor, signaling when to strike. His years of training as an explorer had given him an eye for patterns, and he used it now to predict the enemy's movements. At one point, a soldier charged straight at him, weapon raised. Daniel grabbed a loose shard of crystal from the ground and swung it hard against the soldier's mask. The mask cracked and the figure stumbled back, dazed. Daniel pushed him aside and kept moving, his heart pounding. The battle raged for hours. The enemy was stronger, better armed, but the tribe had something greater: unity and the will to protect their home. They fought not only with weapons but with courage. Every woman in the village, from the youngest to the oldest, took part in defending their people. Still, the cost was heavy. The enemy pressed forward, their ships raining blasts of energy that shattered the crystal towers. Fires spread and smoke filled the sky. Daniel's chest burned with despair, but he refused to give up. At last he spotted something. The enemy ships, though powerful, were vulnerable at their engines. He had studied enough technology to know that. If they could strike there, they could cripple the invaders. Daniel shouted to Sira and pointed at the ships. She understood at once. Together they rallied the warriors and launched a desperate attack. Climbing the tallest towers, they hurled glowing crystal spears with all their strength. The shards pierced the engines of one ship, and with a roar it fell from the sky in flames. The villagers cheered, their spirits lifted. The enemy faltered, surprised by the sudden loss. Daniel pressed the advantage, directing their strikes, guiding them with every ounce of knowledge he had. By nightfall, the invaders retreated. Their leader shouted in fury as the surviving ships rose into the sky. The battle was not a victory without loss, but the village still stood. For the first time in 75 years, they had resisted. Exhausted, Daniel sank to the ground, his body aching but his heart alive with fire. Sira approached him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You fight, not for you. For all." Daniel managed a weak smile. "We fight together." The villagers gathered, their voices rising in chants. They had faced the enemy and survived, but Daniel knew the war was far from over. The rival empire would not accept defeat so easily. They would return with greater strength, yet in that moment something had changed forever. The tribe no longer saw him as prey or as a curse. They saw him as one of their own. And Daniel, for the first time since crashing on this strange world, felt a deep certainty. Humanity's strength was not in weapons alone, but in unity, creativity, and the will to fight for one another. As the stars lit the night sky, he whispered a promise to himself and to the tribe. "We will be ready when they return." The village was quiet after the battle, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy silence of survival. Smoke drifted from broken towers, and the ground was littered with shards of crystal. Children clung to their mothers, and the elders whispered among themselves, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Daniel sat at the edge of the square, his body aching from every movement. His arms were scraped, his clothes torn, and his mind still burned with the images of the battle. The roar of ships, the clash of spears, the cries of the wounded. Yet even in that pain there was something stronger. For the first time he felt truly bound to these people. Sira moved among the villagers, helping where she could. Her presence was steady, her voice calm, and many looked to her for strength. When she finally came to sit beside Daniel, the weight of the day was in her eyes. "They will come again," Daniel said softly. He knew she might not understand every word, but she caught the meaning. Sira nodded. Yes, again, the truth lay heavy between them. The rival empire had not been defeated. One battle would not stop them. They would return with greater force, and when they did, the tribe might not survive unless they changed. That night, the elders gathered in the central hall. Daniel was brought inside, seated before them as the entire village crowded outside to hear the decision. The crystals glowed faintly, filling the chamber with a soft light. The eldest of the women, her face lined with years of grief and wisdom, spoke slowly. "We fought, we lived. But tomorrow?" Her words, though short, carried the fear of everyone. What would tomorrow bring? Could they defend themselves again? Sira stood tall, her spear in hand. She gestured toward Daniel.
"He helped."
"Without him, we fall," the elders murmured. Some nodded, others frowned. One spoke sharply, pointing at Daniel. "He is danger. Because of him they came." Daniel's heart sank. He had feared this. They might decide that keeping him would only bring more suffering. But another elder spoke, her voice softer. "He is also hope. The enemy feared him. That is why they wanted him." The hall fell into silence. All eyes turned to Daniel. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. "I did not choose to crash here," he said, his voice steady, "but I am here. And if I leave, they will still return. They will not stop with me. They want to end you forever. You need to fight not just with spears but with new ways, with planning, with strategy." He drew shapes in the dust on the floor, lines for ships, circles for the village, arrows for attacks. The villagers leaned closer, studying the strange map. Daniel pointed and spoke in simple words they could understand. "Together, strong, plan." Sira stepped forward, translating his ideas into words her people understood. The elders watched, their faces slowly shifting from doubt to thoughtfulness. At last, the eldest woman nodded. "Then we choose tomorrow, we fight. Not as we were, but as we must be." A cheer rose from the crowd outside. It was not loud or wild, but steady and firm, the sound of a people ready to take control of their future. From that day, the village began to change. Daniel worked with Sira and the warriors, teaching them new ways to defend their home. He showed them how to build traps, how to use the crystals not only as weapons but as shields. He studied the broken parts of his ship and repurposed what he could, creating simple tools and signals. The tribe trained day and night. Young and old all took part. Children carried water and gathered supplies while the elders carved knowledge into crystal walls so it would not be lost again. The warriors learned to fight not in single combat but in groups, moving together with precision. Daniel saw the fire in their eyes growing brighter. They were no longer only survivors of the past, they were fighters for the future. Weeks passed before the enemy returned. The sky darkened once more as ships descended, larger this time, their engines screaming through the air. But the village was ready. The warriors stood in formation, their crystal weapons glowing. The platforms had been reinforced, the rivers channeled to create traps, and the towers wired with shards that hummed with unstable energy. Daniel stood at the front with Sira, his heart steady. He was afraid, but he knew fear was not weakness. It was a reminder of what was at stake. The enemy leader stepped forward again, his voice cold. "Last chance. Give us the man. Give us the one who breaks the old law." Sira raised her spear. Her voice rang clear and strong. "No." The enemy moved to attack, but this time the tribe did not only react. They struck first. Crystal towers hummed as they released bursts of energy, blinding the enemy soldiers. Spears rained from above, guided by Daniel's signals. Warriors moved in coordinated strikes, surrounding the invaders and forcing them into traps. The rivers, redirected by careful planning, surged forward and swallowed enemy machines in glowing water. The battle was fierce. The enemy's weapons were strong, but the tribe fought with unity and creativity. For every attack, they had an answer. For every strike, they found a way to turn weakness into strength. Daniel himself fought side by side with Sira, wielding a shard of crystal like a blade. He was not the strongest, but he was determined, and that determination inspired those around him. When an enemy soldier cornered a group of children, Daniel threw himself into the path, deflecting the strike and giving the warriors time to pull the children to safety. Hours passed, but the tide turned. One by one, the enemy fell or fled. At last, the surviving ships rose into the sky, their engines damaged, their soldiers broken. The rival empire had been defeated, not forever, but enough to give the tribe control of their land once more. The village erupted in cheers. Voices rose in triumph, echoing through the crystal forest. For the first time in 75 years, the people had not only survived, they had won. Daniel stood in the square, exhausted but alive. The villagers surrounded him, their eyes shining with gratitude. Children touched his hands, warriors clasped his shoulders, and the elders bowed their heads in respect. Sira stepped forward, her face lit with pride. She raised her spear high and shouted a single word. The crowd repeated it again and again, until the night sky rang with the sound. Daniel did not know the full meaning of the word, but he understood the spirit behind it. They were not calling him prey or curse or stranger. They were calling him one of their own. Later, as the fires of celebration burned and songs filled the air, Daniel stood alone at the edge of the village. He looked at the stars, the same stars he had once seen as an explorer lost in space. Now they seemed different, brighter, as if they held promise instead of emptiness. Sira joined him, silent at first. Then she spoke softly. "You change us. You give tomorrow." Daniel smiled, though his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "No," he said. We gave tomorrow together. They stood side by side, looking out at the horizon where the first light of dawn began to glow. The past had been filled with loss and fear, but the future was theirs to shape. And for the first time since his crash, Daniel felt certain. He had not been brought here by chance. He had been brought here for this. A choice had been made, not by him alone, but by all of them. The choice of tomorrow.